Chapter 14. "Well, you've caused quite the stir," Laney said when Tyler opened the door. He looked incredible in his jeans and plaid shirt, and Laney had to force her eyes to stay on his face rather than travel down his body. "Whatever do you mean?" His words might have been curious, but his smile was sly as he stepped back and allowed her entrance. He knew exactly what she meant. "I mean, I just spent the last 3 hours with the rest of the crew brainstorming how to save this show if you keep sending all the women home early." "Yeah? And what did they decide?" Was he smiling? He was, like a Cheshire cat. He was enjoying this. "Are you doing this on purpose?" "On purpose?" A teasing glint appeared in his eyes. "I suppose it depends on what you mean by on purpose. Am I sending women home I don't see a future with on purpose? Yes, I am. But if you mean am I trying to ruin the show on purpose? No, I'm not. I came on this show for 2 reasons. Well, 3 if you count Nancy." "Nancy? Who's Nancy? Did he have a woman at home?" "Nancy's my best friend's wife. Remember, I told you she convinced me to come on the show?" Relief flooded Laney. Oh, geez, relief? She needed to get a hold of her emotions. She wasn't competing for him. "Right, I do remember you saying that. So..." Relief flooded Laney. Oh, geez, relief? She needed to get a hold on her emotions. She wasn't competing for him. "Right, I do remember you saying that. So what are the other 2 reasons?" Laney walked past him to seem uninterested, though she was hanging on his every word. She put her makeup case down and opened the lid. Look busy. She needed to look busy. "One reason is the money. I don't know if they pay the women, but they pay me. And as much as I don't like doing things for the money, I need it to keep my ranch going." Something in the sincerity of his voice made Laney turn back to look at him. "Your ranch means a lot to you, doesn't it?" "It does. I grew up on a ranch and always knew it was what I wanted to do." "And what about the last reason?" Laney's breath caught in her throat as she asked the question. She hoped he was looking for love, and yet she didn't. If he was, it meant he probably wasn't just playing some game, like Marianne said they often did, but it also meant that he might find it with someone other than herself. If he wasn't, then he wasn't the man she thought he was. Neither answer really held a win for Laney. He took a step toward her, and Laney felt electricity crackle in the air. "I hoped perhaps I might find love. Maybe that's silly with this being a reality show and not ordinary circumstances, but I live in a small town. Not a lot of fish in that sea. I guess I hoped I might meet someone special here." "And have you?" His eyes tore through hers like he was reading every inch of her soul. Laney wanted to close the book. She couldn't be vulnerable for him, but her feet were glued to the floor, her body frozen in place. "I can't say I've found love, but I've certainly found something I'd like to explore more." His gaze felt like a caress on her face, sending a streak of fire from her cheek all the way down to the floor. He liked her? But he couldn't like her. She wasn't a contestant. It would never work. But she couldn't deny she felt something for him any longer. "Tyler, She didn't get to finish the sentence as the door opened then, and Justin's voice carried into the room. "Laney, I need you to..." Even though they hadn't been touching when the door opened, Laney knew they looked guilty, and she could tell from Justin's face that he had seen enough to suspect something. But oddly, he said nothing, just finished his sentence. "Do Heidi's makeup in 20 minutes. Laney didn't like the look in his eyes. They gleamed wickedly like an older brother who had just obtained dirt he could use to frame his younger sibling. "Sure, I'll be there in a bit. I need to finish with Tyler." When the door closed behind Justin, Laney spoke first. "We better get started." Though the look wasn't forgotten, she didn't have time to deal with it, or its ramifications right now. Tyler wanted to discuss the moment. He had wanted to kiss Laney. He wanted to tell her he wished she was a contestant, but the second Justin left, she had become all business again. He didn't blame her. He'd seen the spark in Justin's eyes as he knew she had. Tyler was wary of Justin at the best of times, but he was even more wary now, having no idea what Justin might do with what he had seen. Would he revoke Tyler's contract? Fire Laney? Though he needed the money, Tyler wouldn't be too hurt if they revoked his contract. Then he could pursue Laney himself. He waited patiently as she changed his tie and applied his makeup, hoping the right words would come into his head, but he kept coming up blank. "Laney," he began when she finished, and began packing her supplies. "We need to talk about..." "We will," she said, cutting him off. Her eyes did not meet his, though. Just not right now. You have your solo date to focus on, and I have to go do her makeup. With that, she closed her case and walked out of his room. Tyler sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Maybe he should just talk to Justin, tell him he felt something for Laney, more than he did for the contestants. He might lose the money, but he thought he might gain something even greater. Tonight, he decided, he would find Justin after his date with Heidi and tell him everything. Laney had said they were trying to figure out what to do with the show. Maybe this would help them. Maybe it wasn't too late to get another cowboy and new women in. Pulling his shoulders back, he left the room. Tonight, he would get to ride with Heidi, so he might as well be waiting by the limo when she arrived. "You look beautiful," he said 15 minutes later when she emerged from the main house in a stunning green dress. Laney had done a wonderful job on her makeup, somehow drawing more attention to her already arresting green eyes. Her red hair lay piled on her head, but a few curly tendrils escaped and coiled by her ears. It surprised him to feel his breath catch a little. How could he feel attracted to Heidi and Laney at the same time? They were completely different people. "Thank you. You look handsome as well." He opened the limo door for her. "Shall we?" "We shall." She climbed in first, scooting over to leave him room. After shutting the door, he settled in beside her. "How's the experience going for you?" he asked. It was a rather dumb and mundane question. This was one of the first times he had gotten to chat with her without the other women or even the camera around. "It's definitely an experience." She said the words in a way that left him wondering if that was good or bad. "I grew up in a large family, so sharing the house hasn't been so bad, but that many women together..." She shook her head, and he understood her meaning. "I wondered about that. What do you do for entertainment?" They didn't let him see the women except for the dates and the ceremony night, and he wondered if they were often as bored as he was. "I try to read. They let me keep my Bible, though they took all the rest of my books." "You're a believer, then?" He wasn't keeping a mental tally of Heidi's qualities, but had he been, she would have gained another check. "Of course. God is important to me. It's getting a lot harder to teach in the public schools where I am now. I mean, they haven't let God in for years, but now, well, let's just say they allow in almost everything except God. And I teach preschool. I can't even imagine how much harder it is for high school teachers." Tyler couldn't imagine either. He rarely watched the news because it seemed like every time he turned it on, he could see how the world was moving farther away from God, and his community was small, and most of them attended church. He was almost disappointed when the limo pulled to a stop in front of a breathtaking restaurant that overlooked an inlet. They still had the rest of the evening, but once they got inside, there would be the camera and other people watching. Tyler knew it wouldn't quite be the same. He was tempted to hold her hand as they walked up the sidewalk, but the moment with Laney was still too fresh in his mind. He glanced around for the camera. Shouldn't Marianne and Laney be here already? Maybe they had told Laney she could skip this one, but there was no way they wouldn't film this date. A host dressed in black slacks and a white shirt opened the main door for them as they approached. "Mr. Hall," he said with a nod, "if you'll follow me, we have your table all set up." Ah, so perhaps they had arrived first and would be waiting for them. The lights in the restaurant were dim, creating a romantic atmosphere, and Tyler could feel his connection with Heidi growing. They followed the host past the other patrons to a private room at the back. An elegant table for two had been set up with candles, adding a little more light to the area. The camera was up and the lights were on, but there was no sign of Marianne or Laney. Had they decided to just let the camera roll? Perhaps the producers had thought they would be a distraction, and they weren't wrong. Even though he was attracted to Heidi, the moment with Laney earlier still played in his mind. "This is lovely," Heidi said, squeezing his hand. He forced his attention back to her. "Yes, it is." Focus. He needed to focus on her. He owed her that. He owed himself that. With a smile, he pulled out her chair for her and pushed it in after she sat down. A basket of bread and butter sat in the middle of the table, but he noticed she took none, simply folded her hands in her lap. "The chef has prepared a special menu for you tonight. I'll leave this with you, and the chef will be out soon to take your order himself," the host said as he handed them a single sheet of cardstock-like paper. Tyler scanned the paper, surprised to only see 6 options on it. The appetizers consisted of duck pâté en croûte or escargot à la bourguignon. He wasn't exactly sure what duck pâté en croûte was, but he knew the other was snails, and he had no desire for those. Some steak dish and what he thought was a fish dish were the only entree choices, and then there were 2 for dessert as well. Tyler had never understood the draw of fancy restaurants like these. He preferred places where he could not only pronounce what he was ordering, but knew that it would fill him up. This so reminds me of Paris. I'm so glad they chose a French restaurant. You've been to Paris? Tyler found that surprising on a teacher's salary. He knew they didn't make as much as people generally assumed because his mother had been a teacher before she retired. They'd never had the money for exotic vacations, even with both his parents earning an income. Oh yeah, I go every year. France and Italy. My parents own a vineyard in Washington State, and we like to travel around tasting wines from different wineries to see what maybe we should add. A cold stone settled in Tyler's stomach. So, your family must drink a lot. Heidi giggled. Well, we don't get drunk, but yeah, wine is served at every meal. Why, is that a problem? You're not against drinking, are you? Morally, no, but I'm a recovering alcoholic. I can't be around alcohol at every meal. Oh. Heidi's voice fell flat, and Tyler knew what she was thinking. This was a deal breaker. Wine was important to her family, and he would never ask her to give it up, but there was no way he would be able to be around it that often. While he could opt out of the family vacations or dinners, he knew that would cause resentment in the future and tear them apart. Even their shared faith probably wasn't enough to overcome these obstacles. Yeah, but hey, that doesn't mean we can't enjoy a nice dinner, right? Give you a reminder of France before you go? You'd stay, even though you know we can't work? Heidi looked at him as if he'd just grown a third eye. He must have gotten a reputation among the women, sending them home as often as he did. Tyler shrugged. We have to eat, right? He picked up his water glass and took a drink. That we do. You know, I wouldn't have to drink wine with every meal. We could abstain together. And maybe we could find other things to see on the vacations. He appreciated that she was offering a compromise, but he didn't think she would really be happy if she followed through with it. Do you think you'd be okay with that? I mean, it would mean breaking from the family tradition. Her teeth nibbled on her bottom lip. I'd like to think I could try. That's sweet, Heidi, but this isn't something that's going to go away from me. I don't drink when I go out. I don't keep liquor in my house, and I avoid situations where a lot of people are drinking. It's just too tempting. Heidi picked up a piece of bread and turned it in her hands. I guess you're right. I'm just disappointed because I think we might have been good together, minus this fact, of course. God has a plan for everything, and I have no doubt his hand is in this. Maybe your perfect man will see you on the show and come into your life. Heidi chuckled at that, but picked up her water glass. I'll toast to that, and to new friends. With a smile, Tyler raised his glass and clinked it against hers. But now that he knew Heidi wasn't the woman for him, his mind went back to the other woman, who seemed to continually pop up there. He had just told Heidi he believed God was in control, but then how did he explain his feelings for Laney?